Today Mats Rehnman performs in our livestream studio. Mats Rehnman is a Swedish storyteller who has been part of the growing art of storytelling since its renaissance some 30 years ago. Mats is well known on international festivals, both as performer and educator of storytellers. In his repertoire he takes special interest in stories with an existential twist, stories with a burning question. Today he performs The Labyrinth. Listen to a story about corruption and its consequences when we let loose one of the worst monsters ever, the Minotaur. Enjoy the story of Mats Rehnman.
So, this is Heraklion, the port city on Crete. The houses, the alleys, the squares, the marketplace, and the man coming, walking along the street. People coming out of the house, bowing to him. It's a tall man, handsome, a powerful man. His name is King Minos, the mightiest ruler in the world in this time. King Minos, he was proud seeing his people, seeing the fields over there with all his cattle. Passing through the port, he could see his army of battleships. All these masts, they were like a forest. Yes, and he passed the magazines filled with honey and olive oil and wheat. But he left the port and went down to the shore to walk. And he was thinking about how lucky he was. Just think about the wife, Parsifai, whom he loved dearly, who just had given him a daughter, Ariadne. And he said to himself, I should make a great feast. I should make a sacrifice to the gods to thank them for all that they have given to me. But ordinary little kings, they would sacrifice horses or bulls, but I'm Minos. I should sacrifice something greater, something to never be forgotten by mankind or by the gods. But what? Well, standing there on the shore, he got an idea to say a prayer. He said, "O you mighty sender of waves, O you shaker of the grounds, O Poseidon, I pray to you, give me something. Give me something I can use as a sacrifice to the gods, so that the gods will never forget me, and neither mankind ever." That was his prayer. And, you know, sometimes the gods listen to us. Sometimes they give us what we ask for. Something strange was happening here. It was so silent suddenly. The crickets all silent. The birds landing on the ground all silent. The water still, not a wave. And then he could see something. He spotted some kind of movement out there. He could see it was like two horns coming up from the water, golden. And in the next moment, the water broke for a huge bull's head. A white bull was coming out of the ocean. It was enormous. It had red eyes, flames around its nose. It came walking up on the shore. It had the size of 4 bulls. But it was peaceful, just standing there, watching him. And he understood. Poseidon had sent him one of his own cattle from the bottom of the sea. So he walked over and he stretched out a hand and he took hold of the ear of the bull and started to walk. And it followed him peacefully into the city. And of course people came out of the houses amazed by this animal. And he walked through Heraklion, and people were following him along the road to Knossos, where he had his palace. And having arrived there, he gave a speech. He said, "Listen, all you, my people. I want you to dress up now. I want you to bring musical instruments and flowers, and I want you to bring your blood bowls, because we are going to have a feast of sacrifice tonight." So people ran away to prepare, and the priests took the bull to prepare, and King Minos, he went into the palace to prepare. Now, that evening, King Minos walked out to the hill of sacrifices. People were already waiting for him. He walked through the crowd to the top of the hill where he was standing, and they could all see him in his magnificent red robe and holding the golden double axe in his hands, the very symbol for his might. And now, the bull, the priests were bringing it. It was magnificent. It had a red blanket over its back. It had flowers around its golden horn. And it peacefully walked through the crowd and up on the hill. And so people waited while the king was lifting the axe, ready to make the cut. But he seemed to hesitate a bit. He was thinking, what if he had such a bull on his fields, mating with his cows? Just imagine the cattle that he would have. Goodness, he couldn't bear to kill it, thinking about all the wealth it could bring to him. Well, would it be right for him to not kill it? Poseidon had given it to him, but on the other hand, wasn't he the king here? Wasn't this his land? Didn't he have the right to do what he wanted? He was the law himself, right? He gave the order. The priests brought the bull out of the fields, and they brought back 12 black bulls. And that's a good sacrifice. Very soon, the axe was cutting and cutting, head after head, and the blood of the bulls were pouring down the gutters from the hill, down to people who, with their blood bowls, collected it so they all could walk around and drink from it, the sacred blood. And then the feast. Now, the fire, where they were burning the flesh, and the black smoke going up to the heavens, up to Olympus, to the gods. Now we can imagine the gods were pleased. Such a sacrifice. Well, not one of them. And that one was Poseidon himself. And he couldn't believe that this stupid little king down there had kept the bull for himself, when it was aimed for the people, the humanity and the gods. Oh, Poseidon wanted to punish. And my friends, I say to you, if you ever want to piss off some kind of authority like the police or the politicians, it's not a wise thing to do, but you'll survive that. But for heaven's sake, never, ever challenge Poseidon. There is no one more revengeful than him. Poseidon was thinking, what should he do? Should he send a tsunami over Crete and wash away the cities? Or an earthquake to tear down the houses? Or a volcano and burn it all? No. No. No, 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 no. He was going to aim for the king's heart. That night, the feast, the dancing, all the joy. And after the feast, how the king went with his wonderful wife to their bedchamber, and how they lay down to make love as every night. It was a wonderful night. The last wonderful night for the king and his wife. The following morning, the king woke up. And as usually, he stretched for her, because they used to make love in the morning too. But she slipped out of his hands. And he could see her walk naked towards the windows. And he said, "What's wrong? Come to me, my dear." But she was standing there with her tame dove on her shoulder and looking through the window out to the meadows and sighing. What was wrong with her? Now she quickly dressed and left the room, and the king was all alone, and well, he had to dress too and go out and take care of his business. So hours passed, and in the evening he wanted to know where his wife was, and someone told him, "She's out on the meadows we have seen." So that's where he went. And what did he find? She was walking with a bull from the sea. She was kissing its cheeks. She was deeply in love with the beast. And King Minos directly understood that Poseidon had turned her heart from him and to the animal. And his heart was broken. And he ran up, and he first of all wanted to beat her, but then he couldn't because he loved her too much. And then he wanted to kill the bull, but he couldn't do that. What would Poseidon do if he killed the bull? An even worse revenge, maybe. So all he could do was to take her by the hand and bring her back to the palace. And she was crying and weeping and longing for the bull. And his heart was bleeding. But he had to pretend everything was all right. Every day she ran away. And he had to pick her up and bring her home again. He suffered. And of course, she suffered too. Because she wanted the bull. But this stupid animal was just interested in cows, jumping on their backs and mating with them. She was dying out of jealousy. She wanted him for herself. But the bull wasn't interested of a woman. What could she do? Well, she got an idea. She left Knossos one day and walked down to Heraklion, to the area of the port. And there was a house with a blue door which she knocked on. And the door opened, and there was a man. His name was Daedalus. And here I need to stop my story a bit just to say a few things about Daedalus. You see, he was a very famous man in those days. And he, of course, has his own story, coming from somewhere and going somewhere. But right now, he appears here in our labyrinth. He was a famous painter. He was a brilliant architect. He was the man who invented the sail and the saw for the benefit of humans. He could even make statues that moved their arms and their eyes. He was a master. Could he help her? She wondered. Now, one thing about Daedalus you should know is that he didn't like the rulers of this world. And when he heard what the queen wanted to do, to cheat on the king, he enjoyed that thought. Yes, he needed to help her do this. So he said to the queen, "My lady, go back And tomorrow morning, come down to the meadows. I will have prepared something for you. So she went home. And during that night, Daedalus, he worked together with his son, whose name you might have heard, Icarus. They worked in the workshop making a cow of wood. It was perfect. They painted it white as salt. The eyes were red and could move. The horns were golden, just like the bull. And in the morning he called for strong men to carry the cow. And so they walked early over to Knossos and came to the meadows, and the strong men were left, and Daedalus waited with his son. And here came the queen. And she looked at them. She looked at the cow. I didn't want another cow, she said. I've had enough of cows here. Be calm, my lady. Let me show you, Daedalus said. And with a smile, he opened a lid on the belly of the wooden cow. And she understood. Oh, she blushed. Thank you, Daedalus. I will pay you well. Now I need you and your son to leave from here. And they left. And she quickly undressed. And so she crawled through the lid into the hollow cow and put herself to be ready. And she waited in there, in the warm wooden body. And soon enough she could hear sounds around the cow. The bull, how the ground was shaking. He had spotted this little beautiful white cow, and he was interested. He was walking around the little cow. He was making strong sounds to prepare her for what was coming. And then he went to the backside of her, and inside the cow, but see if I could hear the sound of the wood when he landed on top of it. And so he started to make love to this wooden cow and to the one who was inside it. Oh, good gods! He was magnificent. Her husband was fine too, but this was on another level. Oh, that day. Oh, the pleasures. Oh, her screaming and his mooing. That was a love-making for hours. At the evening, the bull pulled out and left. And she was exhausted. She opened the lid and fell down to the ground, covered with sweat. And she was sore, but she was happy and pleased. Yeah, she was satisfied and not very interested anymore in the bull. She actually longed home to her husband. He was a nice man. She was ready to return. So she walked up to the palace and into the bedchamber, and there he was, the husband, in the bed. And King Minos, he was glad when he saw that she looked at him again with tenderness. He had won her back. And she came to bed. But then he could feel the smell around her, the smell of animals. And he couldn't believe it. Had she made love with the bull? He had to cool down. He couldn't do anything about this. He had to pretend as if nothing had happened, though his heart was black. His heart was turning into ashes of pain. Well, at least she was back now. She was back and things could be normal again, which they were for a while, until she one day noticed something was happening inside her body. No, this wasn't possible. She was bearing a child. What kind of animal would she give birth to? What would it be? And soon the king noticed too. And he was terrified. She was pregnant with something. What would it be? But he couldn't do anything. He had to pretend to be the father, to keep away all the rumors that would destroy them. Yeah. It was coldness between them. They were so lonely. And 9 months passed. And so one day, she delivered. Was it a child? Well, in a way. It was a boy with a boy's body, but big enough to be like 2 years. But the head, it was a bull's head. It was terrifying. And also it was screaming. It was screaming for food. Now, she tried to feed him with her breast, but this one didn't want milk. He was screaming and screaming through the night. Well, it was lucky for her that he didn't want milk because his mouth was filled with teeth. And the next morning, they found out what he wanted. Her tame dove happened to land on the cradle, and in that moment, a hand grabbed the dove, tore off its head, and drank the blood. And then how the child tore the bird to pieces, ate the head, the feathers, the flesh, the bones. All he left were the claws. This child wanted to hunt. This child wanted to feed living flesh. And people called him King Minos bull, Minotaurus. And he was growing fast, this son, this foster son of Minos. When he was 2 years old, he was big like an adult. When he was 4 years old, he was taller than any man in the kingdom. And he was hunting all the time. If he saw a cat, he broke its back and started to feed on its stomach while it still was screaming. He killed dogs, calves, bulls, anything that moved, and ate. And so one day that happened which they had feared so long. They found the remains of a slave in a room. Parts of the skull was still there, and one of the feet. The rest was gone. And now, slaves started to run away from the palace. Noblemen didn't dare to come with their families to the palace of Knossos and celebrate with the king. And he realized that his power was threatened by the excesses of this monster, Minotaurus. So he needed something to be done, but he couldn't kill it. And that is why he one day by himself went to Heraklion. And he went to that house with the blue door, and he knocked on it, and the door opened, and there was Daedalus. And Daedalus said, "My king, I had expected you one of these days. I think I know what kind of help you need. I would do it for you, for all of us. But I tell you, it will cost you a lot of gold. And the king was ready to pay. And so Daedalus and Icarus and all the workers on Crete got together to start to build this masterwork of architecture. An underground palace for the Minotaurus, a labyrinth. It took 3 years. But when they were done, they could gather the king's family outside those bronzen gates. And the Minotaurus was there too, wondering what they wanted with him. And the king said, "My son, I know what you like the most, and you will have it more than ever. But I need you to step into this labyrinth, this underground palace, and live there forever. And I will send to you anything you want to kill, all sorts of animals. Yeah, people too. But there is a limitation to it. I can give you 7 boys and 7 girls of good family once a year, not more." Well, that was a negotiation. The result of keeping the white bull for himself once. There was no way back. Luckily, Minotaurus accepted this and stepped through the gates and down into the labyrinth, and they could lock the doors behind him, and so Knossos was safe. But they needed to give the monster his tribute. So every day they opened it and they sent down cows and goats and sheep. They bought animals from merchants. They could buy zebras and camels and even lions at times. Now the labyrinth, this huge palace underground, had openings in its roof, so air could come in and some light. So they could also hear from above the hunting, the screaming inside the dark. And then the stench of rotting flesh. Well, then there was a problem with people. The king couldn't take the youngsters from his own noblemen here on Crete. That would be a revolt. So he needed to start war. Everything has consequences. Even keeping a bull for yourself. So he sent out his fleet to fight the neighboring kingdoms and to bring back youngsters to be thrown into the labyrinth. And this went on for a few years, but then was the Great War. For a reason, he started war against Athens, his biggest enemy, and he won the war. And King Aegeus, the king of Athens, was forced to promise to send every year 7 boys and 7 girls of good family to Crete to be sacrificed. And so some kind of balance was kept in the world. Let's call it a terror balance. So, having come so far through this labyrinth of stories, following the red thread of it, we are actually going to let this thread go. We will leave King Minos and Crete and the Minotaurus, and we will go back in time, and we will leave Crete and go to a small country on the mainland of Greece. It's called Troezen. Now in this kingdom, there was a daughter of the king named Aitra. She was a young maiden when they one day got a visit from Athens. It was the king Aegeus of Athens. He was a friend of the king of Troyes, and these two men, they were talking and drinking and having a good time, and Aitra was there too, and she liked this Aegeus. In those days he was a young and handsome man, and she showed him that she liked him. Now let me mention that this was going on just about the same time as King Minos on Crete was keeping the white bull for himself. Now here on Troyes, during the men's conversation, Aegeus noticed this lovely daughter and the glances she gave him. And late that night when the king of the country was going to bed, Aitra said to Aegeus, "Wouldn't you like a walk in our gardens? We have lovely gardens here." And yes, he was happy to follow her. So they went out and they walked there through the gardens, and it was beautiful, a beautiful night. And he was a bit surprised when she took his hand, but he enjoyed it. And they walked and they talked, and as you understand, things happened that night. They spent it together. The following morning, Aitra was happy and Aegeus was happy, but he said to her, "My dearest friend, being the king of Athens, I have mighty enemies. I cannot stay here any longer with you, and I cannot bring you with me because Athens is a dangerous place these days. So I need to say goodbye to you." And she was all right with that. But they took a last walk through the gardens. And then the king got an idea. Aegeus said, "Can you call for some of those soldiers over there to help us with something?" 4 soldiers came, and he asked them to lift a huge rock on the ground. And then he put his own sandals there and his sword with ivory handle. And so the stone was put back. And he said to Aitra, "If it would happen that you became pregnant now, which would be a wonderful miracle, and if you gave birth to a boy, I would like you to call him Theseus. And if he one day finds my sandals and my sword, then reveal our secret, that I am his father, and tell him to come to me in Athens." She agreed to this. They kissed and hugged. They said goodbye, and there were no tears. Now, of course, she was pregnant. She gave birth to a handsome little baby boy, and she called him Theseus. And he grew quickly. And he was a very strong young man. He liked to wrestle and train arms. And he was also very handsome. And he was not the kind of hero as Hercules of this time. You know, the big, strong man with a lion skin over his shoulder. No, this young man, he was thin, he was handsome, he was elegant, and he liked to brush his long, beautiful hair in front of a silver shield. But when in battle, no one could defeat him. And so, when he was 16 years old, the day came when the secret would be revealed. He was wrestling with 3 soldiers, throwing them around because he was so strong. But he happened to throw one of them to that rock, and the man broke his leg and was screaming in pain. And of course, Theseus got angry, not on himself, but on the stone. Well, you know, teenagers. So he ran up to the stone and lifted it with his own hands and threw it away. And what's this? A pair of sandals and a sword with ivory handle. Well, his mother up in the palace had seen all this through a window. She called for him. And he brought the sandals and the sword, and he went there. And so she could talk with him, and she said, "At last, I can tell you what you've been asking for your entire life. Who is your father? He is a king of Athens. His name is Aegeus. And now that you have found these items, he wants you to come to Athens to see him." He was excited. He was excited. His father was a real king. And he wanted to leave directly. Now, the grandfather said to him that you need to take a ship, because the way over Argolis, that's the land between Troyes and Athens, is very dangerous. So take a ship, that's safe. But to this Theseus answered, "I can't come to Athens without sand on my sandals and without blood on my new sword." Well, you know, teenage heroes, that's their kind of language. So he walked over Argolis, and I have to say that this part of the story is so huge with all its battles and all its monsters that it will be a performance in itself. So I will leave it, but I will just give you one sample of the kind of adventures that this boy went through. One day, he arrived to a small village at the bottom of a big mountain. And he asked an old woman, "What is the fastest way to Athens? Is it over the mountain or around the mountain?" And to this she said, "Well, it's over the mountain because it's 3 days around the mountain, but you should go around because up on this mountain there's a man named Skiron. He is kind of a giant. He is completely evil. If you run upon him, you will die. And you wouldn't want that, so go around the mountain." He thanked for the information, and well, you guess which way he took. Up the mountain, walking on small, narrow pathways. The cliffs were very deep down to the sea, so he had to be very careful walking there. And he was listening carefully. And so suddenly, he could hear a sound around the next corner. Slowly, he moved forward with one hand on the sword on his back. Now, coming around the corner, he could first of all see a pair of huge feet. Someone was sitting there. And he came around and he saw this man, Skiron. He was enormous. He was all naked. He was covered with dirt. He had a horrifying smile on his face when he said, "Oh my, a young nobleman climbing my mountain. I'm pleased to see you. I suppose you want to go by me across the mountain. Well, it's a very narrow pathway. We need to be careful so that no one of us falls down into the sea. Now, don't worry, I will let you through, if you only will do one thing for me. You see, my feet, they are kind of dirty. I want you to wash them for me." Now you must understand that washing feet is the work for slaves. So this was a magnificent insult to a young nobleman. But Theseus decided to be careful. So he said, "Very well, Skiron, if you stand up, I will wash your feet. Do you have any water here?" Skiron put out a big bowl in front of him, And you couldn't really call this water. It was brown and filthy. And Skiron stood up and he put his feet in the water with a splash. And now Theseus could see that the dirt on these feet was made of the kind of excrements that fall out from the human body. And this he was supposed to wash off. Well, with his hand on his sword in the back, he took hold of the ankle of Skiron, and he could directly feel the muscles moving in the leg. Skiron was planning to kick him down over the cliff, but he was quicker. With his sword he cut through the leg, so that blood was pouring out, and Skiron was screaming, standing on one leg, and now he needed just one push, and Skiron went over the cliff, and he fell screaming, hitting the rocks, bleeding, falling down into the waters, and Theseus came after and stood on the cliff, and he threw the leg after the man. And he could see him there, the water turning red from the Skiron's blood, and then he could see a big shadow over there. An enormous turtle came swimming from the bottom of the sea. It was enormous when it lifted its head and started to feed on the screaming giant. And so Theseus could go on walking. Yeah, you can imagine the rest of the adventures on Argolis, which we leave behind. Because now we have come to Athens. Theseus had come to the palace of his own father. He didn't reveal himself. He wanted to check out the surroundings. He didn't know the politics of this place. So he sat down close to the door in the great hall and looked around on all these noblemen, these rich people. He hadn't seen a place like this in his life. And Athens outside here, what a city. But he was watching and waiting. And soon enough he could see a door opening over there, and a grey-haired man came out. And he could directly see that face. That was his father. The same eyes, the nose, the mouth. It was Aegeus. But he didn't reveal himself yet, no. No, he waited there by the door, when then he could see a woman following the king into the hall. And she was obviously his wife now. Now I need to tell you the name of this woman. It's a name I'm sure you've heard before. Medea. Who is following her labyrinth of stories through the mythology that we are inside now. And in this moment she happened to be the wife of Aegeus. Now she was a priestess in the cult of Hecate, the goddess of the moon, of witchcraft, of ghosts. She knew many secrets. She was a brilliant woman who directly could see that the young stranger there by the door can be no one else than an unknown son of her husband, which did not suit her because she was hoping to get pregnant and give birth to a heir to this kingdom. And that is why she prepared a bowl with poisoned wine and sent a servant down the hallway, down to the place of the young man, and he received the wine, but he didn't drink. Being a young warrior, he knew the importance of keeping your head clear, so he put it to the side and kept on watching the room. And she grew impatient. So, after a while, she said to her husband, "My dearest Aegeus, have you noticed the young man down there by the door, the stranger?" "Yes, him. I happen to know who he is. He is an assassin sent by your enemies. He is here to kill you. But don't rush. I have prepared poisoned wine. But he's not drinking, and I need your help. I want you to go down and propose a toast so that we get rid of him. Now, Aegeus wasn't very fond of this kind of work. He prepared open conflict. But he respected his wife. So he took his own wine and he walked down to the place where the young man was sitting, and he said, "Welcome, stranger. Being the king here, I used to propose a toast to any stranger coming to my hall before asking for his name. So stand up with me and drink." And Theseus came to his feet, and his heart was pounding. His father, his own father. So of course he took the wine and lifted to drink. But lifting it, there was an opening in his mantle, and the king happened to see the sword hanging by the side of the boy. "Don't drink!" he screamed, and slapped away the bowl so the wine was washing over the tables, burning black marks with the poison. And he said, "I noticed your sword with ivory handle. You must be my son, Theseus." And so the two were hugging, and it was a moment of happiness, long enough for Medea to escape from the palace, from Athens, along her road of stories into another future. Let's leave her. Theseus was at last a prince in Athens, and he was so happy. And he spent some time and he learned about the people living here, and he was on visiting feasts and taking part of ceremonies in the temples. One day he got to know that there was some kind of festivity going on in the great hall in the palace, but he wasn't invited, obviously. He was a bit surprised, a bit disturbed, so he went there. And the room was filled with all the noblemen of the city and their families, and they looked so upset and so sad, all of them. I'll tell you what had been going on there. The lottery. The first lottery. The mother of all lotteries you have seen in the world. But in this lottery, when you won something, you won to travel as a young boy or girl with a ship to Crete, to be sent down into the Labyrinth and eaten by the Minotaurus. That was at stake. And now 7 boys and 7 girls had been chosen already, and their families in despair and tears. And Theseus said, "Father, I wasn't called upon. Why wasn't I here for the lottery?" And Aegeus said, "My son, you are a prince. You are my heir. That's not the agreement with King Minos. You're staying here." "No," said Theseus, "I'm going with the others. I'm going there. You can't stop me." And sure enough, that's what happened. But first, during the night, he decided to ask one of the gods for help. And he was choosing between the temples. Should he ask Zeus, or should he ask Ares, the god of madness in war? No, surprisingly enough, this young warrior chose to ask Aphrodite, the goddess of love, for help. And he didn't see her, of course, there in the temple, but he spoke to her, and she listened, and he was just too cute to ignore. Aphrodite decided to follow him in the shadows and help him out. Next morning, it was time to leave. In the port, all the families had gathered. There was a ship with black sails, and the youngsters were brought on board, and the sailors were at work. And King Aegeus, he said to his son, Theseus, Theseus, I beg you, as you see, the ship has black sails now. When you turn back, if you have survived the labyrinth and you're on the ship, make sure it's a white sail, so I know that I get you back. Well, they were sailing for 2 days. They arrived to Crete and Heraklion. And the Cretensians, they had organized a feast to celebrate the sad company of Athenians, to give them one last memory before dying. So there was food and music and dance. But of course, the youngsters couldn't dance. They were terrified. Well, except for Theseus, because here in the palace he had met this lovely girl who wanted to dance with him. So, yeah, her name was Ariadne. You've heard the name before. None less than the daughter of King Minos and Pasiphae, and the sister of the Minotaurus. Now they were dancing, and of course Aphrodite was there somewhere, unseeable. And she followed the dance, and she could see that this cute girl was fond of Theseus, so she got the idea to stretch her hand into Ariadne's heart and make a little twist. And then there was the sparkle of passion. And now Ariadne, she could die for this young man. She adored him. But she was sad, knowing his destiny tomorrow morning. So when the Athenians had gone to bed, she decided she needed help. So she left Knossos. She went to Heraklion, and you know where she asked for help. The blue door. The old Daedalus in the house. She was weeping, trying to tell him what was going on, and he listened, and he felt sorry for her. And he said, well, I can help you, but you must not tell anyone. And first of all, he fetched a big ball of yarn, red yarn. Here comes the red thread. And then he told her the only way to kill Minotaurus was if one of his own horns pierced through his heart. Now with this knowledge and with the ball of yarn, she left and went back to Knossos. And she woke Theseus up, and she said to him, come with me, come with me. And they went down to the bronzen gates of the labyrinth, and she told him everything she knew now. And she said, I'm tying up this yarn here by the door. Now you take the ball and you walk into the labyrinth, unwind it, because this is the only way you can find your way back out of the labyrinth. So he kissed her. And so he started to unwind the yarn. And he walked down the stairs, and he walked through rooms and hallways and deeper into the labyrinth, unwinding the thread. And he was completely lost now. But when he came to the bottom of the labyrinth, there was the great hall. There were openings in the roof. Moon was shining down, so there were spots of light in here. Now, this was the end of the thread. So he let it go, and he was listening. There was something over there in the shadows. Something breathing heavily. And now, that thing started to move into the moonlight, and he could see the Minotaurus The huge head, the horns, the red eyes, the teeth in the mouth, the enormous body. He was 3 meters high, covered with fur. And Minotaurus started to run towards Theseus. But he was quick. He jumped to the side, and Minotaurus ran by him. And he ran after and started to run up on the back of the beast. And sitting there, he started to chop with his sword, and he cut off one of the horns. And it fell to the floor, and he jumped after. He got hold of it, and he turned around and pointed the horn upwards in the same moment as the beast fell over him. And there was this cracking sound when the horn pierced through the leather-like skin, through the bones, through the flesh, and into the black heart of the monster. And blood was pouring out all over Theseus. He had to struggle to get out from under the dead body. And he crawled around on the ground until he found the yarn, the thread, and he started to wind it up, walking through the hallways, up the stairs, higher, higher in the labyrinth, until he came to the bronzen gates where she was waiting. And she jumped backwards when she saw this figure covered in black blood. "Is that you?" she said, "or is it your ghost?" "Oh, it's me, all right. Come now, we need to save the Athenians." So they went into the palace. They woke up the 7 boys and the 7 girls and brought them down to the ship. And so they could sail away from Crete. That morning, one of the servants came into King Minos' bedroom. "My lord," he said, "you need to wake up. Things have happened. The Athenians have run away, all of them. And the gates to the labyrinth are open. There are blood outside. We believe that Minotaurus has been killed. But also we believe that your daughter, Ariadne, has run away with these foreigners." So there was grief in the palace. Minos and Pasiphae had lost their beloved daughter. And you know what? It's time to leave them. It's time to get out of this labyrinth of stories, which of course continues. I can't tell you about the destiny of Daedalus, but you might know the destiny of Icarus. And since I don't want to destroy your impression of Theseus as a hero, a likable person, I will not say what happened to Ariadne. I might mention that Theseus had forgotten to switch the sails from black to white. So Aegeus, when he saw this ship coming, in his sorrow, he threw himself in the sea to die. Ever since then, it's called the Aegean Sea. And of course, Theseus went on with his adventures, which I don't wish to tell now. Let this be it. Thank you for following me through the labyrinth.